Before we begin, let me tell you this video isn't for everyone. No flashy edits, no hyper-stimulated nonsense, just actual ideas. Only 30% of viewers make it to the end because this isn't brain rot. If you do, you're part of a rare few in today's short attention span wasteland. You think deeper, you focus, you're probably going to do great things. Now, if you want to support content that respects your brain, try Audible free for 30 days using my link in the description, or use my affiliate link when you buy a book. It costs you nothing but helps a lot. Let's get started.
For most of us, particle physics and Wall Street trading firms probably seem worlds apart. But there's actually a long tradition of firms like Goldman Sachs luring academics into their fold in order to develop computer programs and predictive models that might give them an edge. The people developing these models are called quants, referring to quantitative finance. But this isn't just a story about finance or about a man who developed some very useful financial models. What makes Emanuel Derman's memoir special is that it's a thoughtful exploration of our limitations, both personal and universal, and what it means to try to understand a complex world with imperfect tools. 7 long years at Columbia. When Emanuel Derman arrived in New York in 1966, he was expecting the dazzle of a movie scene. But what he got was something a lot grittier. Fresh off a flight from his home in Cape Town, South Africa, he found himself jet-lagged and alone in a gloomy Columbia University dorm called International House. The city felt cold and chaotic, the buildings grimy, and the accents unfamiliar. It wasn't the warm welcome he'd hoped for, and the loneliness hit hard. Still, he had a plan: get a head start before beginning his PhD in physics at Columbia. His early days in America were a cultural shock, no doubt, but they were also fueled by an intense ambition. Particle physics was riding high at the time, and Derman wanted to be part of it. He wasn't just interested in science, he was after something bigger, something transcendent. Like many young physicists, he dreamed of being the next Einstein, cracking open the secrets of the universe. But reality had other plans. The brilliance of Columbia's physics department came with intimidation and pressure. His advisor pointed out his academic blind spots, and towering figures like Professor Tsung-Dao Lee, a Nobel Prize winner, made him question whether he'd ever measure up. Slowly, cracks began to appear in his faith in reductionism, the belief that everything can be broken down into fundamental truths. What once looked like the purest form of knowledge now seemed narrow. Messy, real-world complexity started to appeal more. By the time he finished his PhD, the grand dream had deflated. The once glamorous life of a physicist had turned into a long, lean grind. 7 years of relentless study, cryptic equations, and sleepless nights had left him wondering what it had all added up to. He began to realize that creating knowledge wasn't just about brilliance, it was about endurance, timing, and sometimes luck. But amidst all that uncertainty, something solid did emerge. In the middle of those difficult years, Derman met Eva, a fellow student who brought a little light to the grey halls of Columbia. Their relationship grew quietly but steadily, and by the time he earned his doctorate in 1973, they were married. In a life driven by theory and abstraction, that human connection was something real, a grounding force that stayed with him long after he left academia behind. Changing perspectives at Oxford. In the fall of 1973, Derman left New York for his first postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania. His wife, Eva, had to stay behind to finish her own PhD, and Derman was learning just how lonely post-academic life could feel. He'd imagined postdoc work as a kind of intellectual retreat, free from distractions, but the reality was grimmer. The job market was tight, the pressure to publish intense, and the sense of direction nearly non-existent. It wasn't the serene life of the mind he'd envisioned. It was survival mode with equations. But then a lifeline appeared in the form of so-called dimuon events. which involved studying the unusual results of particle accelerator experiments. This led to some publishable research, which in turn caught the attention of the University of Oxford. It felt like a redemption arc, going from anxious obscurity to an appointment at one of the world's most prestigious universities. So in 1975, he crossed the Atlantic and landed in the academic dream of his youth. Oxford brought professional satisfaction, but also a familiar sense of isolation. Ava couldn't join him for another 7 months, and social life in the tightly knit college system made him feel like an outsider, technically in, but culturally out. Still, he dove headfirst into his research, especially charm quarks and dimuon data, writing code into the early morning hours. After the struggles at Penn, he'd figured out how to turn research into publications, and when that failed, how to at least mine some value from the effort. For a while, he was thriving. Eventually, life settled down. Eva arrived, they shared an office with a quirky colleague and found some rhythm, even as the Oxford winters bit through every layer of clothing. But there were deeper currents too. England's subtle xenophobia lingered in the background, reminding him that being South African and Jewish placed him perpetually on the edge. And yet, in the midst of all this, he stumbled into the writings of Rudolf Steiner. The Austrian thinker's blend of mysticism and science hit a nerve. It was weird, sure, but also nourishing in a way pure data never quite was. By the end of his Oxford stint, Derman had changed again. He was becoming less of a physicist and more of a thinker, someone who'd begun to question the boundaries of knowledge itself. With this new perspective, he embarked on a new postdoc back in New York at Rockefeller University. With a baby on the way and the heat of an unusually hot English summer finally breaking, he left Oxford feeling stronger, more grounded, and ready for whatever was coming next. The highs and lows of the postdoc life. Derman's time at Rockefeller University felt like an oasis, a peaceful, privileged chapter full of intellectual freedom and personal joy. With no teaching duties and a cozy wood-paneled office, he dove into research and soaked up the simple pleasures of fatherhood. Morning walks with his toddler son Joshua became a kind of spiritual ritual. But even in this academic paradise, cracks started to show. His relationship with his mentor Abraham Pace began to sour, and subtle hints, like job ads slipped into his mailbox, made it clear Rockefeller wouldn't be home for long. He moved on to Boulder, Colorado for another postdoc, but the beauty of the Rockies couldn't distract from a growing ache of separation. Ava and Josh stayed behind in New York, and grief over his mother's recent death added to the weight. Though he had prestige and research freedom, the work felt hollow. Eventually, he faced the painful truth. He was done with academia. Not just physics, but the whole cycle of endless research and uncertain reward. That realization led him back to New York and a job at Bell Labs, the famed research hub that ended up feeling more like a corporate hamster wheel than a creative haven. The position meant adjusting to a long commute to New Jersey and life with managers, time cards, and fluorescent lighting. But beneath the bureaucracy, something surprising emerged. Derman fell head over heels for programming. He was crafting code and designing tools like Hex, an algorithm that blended logic with elegance and utility. Still, 5 years at Bell Labs felt like a slow-motion exile. Every evening, he came home and ranted, replaying the same frustrations like a ritual. Ironically enough, it was a film, Louis Malle's My Dinner with André, that reawakened his sense of meaning, reminding him of the dreams he'd once chased. His reignited spirit coincided with headhunters from Wall Street. He was uncertain, but one offer stood out. Goldman Sachs needed quants, and Derman matched the profile. So in November 1985, he finally stepped away from the world of theoretical physics for good and into the booming, high-stakes universe of Wall Street. It wasn't just a new job, it was a reinvention, a leap into the unknown that would ultimately define the second act of his life. Switching gears on Wall Street. When Derman landed at Goldman Sachs in the mid-80s, the place still felt scrappy and intimate. Only 5,000 employees, but packed with ambition. Under the sharp mentorship of Ravi Dattatreya, he was thrown into the deep end of bond options, an exploding market at the time. His task? Improve the shaky models Goldman was using to price them. What Derman created was Bosco, a sleek, user-friendly interface built on top of a more sophisticated version of the classic Black-Scholes-Merton model. It was an instant hit. Derman had made something traders could intuitively use right away. Perhaps best of all, Fisher Black, one of the co-creators of the Black-Scholes-Merton model, gave Derman and his creation his seal of approval. After meeting Black, Derman found a kindred spirit, someone obsessed with clarity, detail, and elegant thinking. This led to the next challenge. Derman, Black, and their colleague Bill Toy set out to build a simple but effective model for valuing bond options. Their goal was to create something that was practical, matched current bond prices, and reflected how interest rates really behaved. Inspired by how physicists use simplified lattice models, they imagined a financial world where short-term rates moved in discrete steps. Longer-term bond prices, then, would reflect the market's expectations of future short-term rates and their possible volatility. The result became known as the Black-Derman toy, or BDT model, which allowed them to infer a full range of future one-year interest rates using just current bond prices and yield curve data. This let them model a wide range of market conditions with one consistent framework. At first, Derman thought it could act like a grand unifying theory of interest rates, but he soon saw the model for what it was, a practical but limited tool, useful for some instruments but not all. Black, ever the realist, called it an as-if model, meaning it worked as if the market only cared about short rates. Though the model didn't capture all of the complexities of the real world, it was a solid and realistic approximation, and one that traders could actually apply. The BDT model became a foundational tool in fixed income modeling, and the process of writing and refining the paper helped Derman embrace clarity and precision in communication, lessons that stayed with him throughout his career. By 1988, he and his colleague Bill Toy were both feeling the grind. Derman had already been through 4 bosses in 2 years, and the instability was getting to him. He started interviewing on the sly. Eventually, he got an offer from Salomon Brothers, legendary in fixed income, and offering double his Goldman salary. The place was intense, no question. One guy even compared it to a shark. Keep swimming or die. But Derman took the leap. That fall, he left Goldman behind and stepped into a whole new kind of storm. A detour through Salomon Brothers. Derman's stint at Salomon Brothers was less of a career move and more of a survival challenge. He walked in with high hopes and walked out, a year later, drained and disillusioned. The job tossed him straight into the deep end of adjustable rate mortgages, financial instruments that made physics look clean and predictable by comparison. He had to lead a team that knew more than he did, and every day felt like a test he wasn't quite ready for. In fact, the more he learned, the messier it all seemed. Mortgage modeling wasn't about precision, it was about navigating a storm of market behavior, human psychology, and educated guesses. Worse than the complexity was the culture. Salomon was a battlefield. Coders hoarded their work, collaboration was rare, and meetings felt more like territorial disputes than team discussions. Compared to Goldman's more collegiate environment, it was like stepping into a financial version of Lord of the Flies. Making matters worse, his boss, Mike, was overbearing and inflexible. He created a toxic atmosphere where creativity went to die. But even in the chaos, Derman learned. He started seeing financial models not just as tools for analysis, but as products with persuasive power. Still, after a brutal market downturn and a round of layoffs, it was clear. His time at Salomon was up. And oddly enough, that rough ride left him better prepared for what came next. Derman returned to Goldman Sachs, and as a result of Fisher Black's sudden departure, he soon found himself co-leading the Quantitative Strategies Group. It was a surprise promotion, but it worked wonders at once, providing him once again with a real sense of purpose. His physics background gave him a unique edge when tackling the group's biggest challenge, pricing exotic Japanese options tied to both Japan's Nikkei index and currency fluctuations. It was complex, but Derman found a way to simplify the process. His secret: treat the pricing model like a fruit salad, break it down to its parts, weigh them properly, and pick the right frame of reference. When done right, the math clicked into place, and suddenly the complex became intuitive. This model became a risk management system known as Samurai, and his approach, making complicated things feel elegant and usable, became Derman's hallmark. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing the kind of work he was born to do. Derman's stint at Salomon Brothers was less of a career move and more of a survival challenge. He walked in with high hopes and walked out, a year later, drained and disillusioned. The job tossed him straight into the deep end of adjustable rate mortgages, financial instruments that made physics look clean and predictable by comparison. He had to lead a team that knew more than he did, and every day felt like a test he wasn't quite ready for. In fact, the more he learned, the messier it all seemed. Mortgage modeling wasn't about precision, it was about navigating a storm of market behavior, human psychology, and educated guesses. Worse than the complexity was the culture. Salomon was a battlefield. Coders hoarded their work, collaboration was rare, and meetings felt more like territorial disputes than team discussions. Compared to Goldman's more collegiate environment, it was like stepping into a financial version of Lord of the Flies. Making matters worse, his boss, Mike, was overbearing and inflexible. He created a toxic atmosphere where creativity went to die. But even in the chaos, Derman learned. He started seeing financial models not just as tools for analysis, but as products with persuasive power. Still, after a brutal market downturn and a round of layoffs, it was clear. His time at Salomon was up. And oddly enough, that rough ride left him better prepared for what came next. Derman returned to Goldman Sachs, and as a result of Fisher Black's sudden departure, he soon found himself co-leading the Quantitative Strategies Group. It was a surprise promotion, but it worked wonders at once, providing him once again with a real sense of purpose. His physics background gave him a unique edge when tackling the group's biggest challenge, pricing exotic Japanese options tied to both Japan's Nikkei index and currency fluctuations. It was complex, but Derman found a way to simplify the process. His secret: treat the pricing model like a fruit salad, break it down to its parts, weigh them properly, and pick the right frame of reference. When done right, the math clicked into place, and suddenly the complex became intuitive. This model became a risk management system known as Samurai, and his approach, making complicated things feel elegant and usable, became Derman's hallmark. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing the kind of work he was born to do. Coming full circle, a little wiser. After the debut of Samurai, things really took off. It wasn't fancy, but it was groundbreaking. No one in the division had seen anything like it. It gave traders a way to understand and manage risk in complex derivative portfolios, and they were all in. This was the early 90s, a time when exotic options were exploding in popularity. Goldman Sachs was determined to lead the charge, and the success of Samurai positioned Derman's team, now dubbed Quantitative Strategies, or QS, right at the heart of the action. Nothing revealed the untamable complexity of the market and the limitations of models like Derman's next challenge, solving the mystery of the smile. The smile was a name that references a downward trend when measuring market volatility, something that Derman first noticed during a quiet moment on the Tokyo trading floor in 1990. The classic Black-Scholes model couldn't explain it. But could another model? The smile set off a full-on intellectual obsession. It hinted at deeper cracks in the classic model. If traders were using faulty models to hedge, then their entire risk strategies could be off. Working with Iraj Khani, Derman started building a model that could handle the messy truths of the market: irregular behavior, sudden jumps, and time-varying volatility. What they developed was the implied tree, a model that shaped itself to market data like a bendable rubber tree. The real innovation came when they figured out how to reverse engineer the smile using a three-option method to pinpoint local volatilities. It was elegant and effective, but the reaction was muted. If it all sounds too complex to you, most traders agreed, and they were reluctant to move on from the more straightforward Black-Scholes model. Meanwhile, when Goldman went public in 1999, the company grew rapidly and the culture changed with it. The collegial atmosphere began to fade. Derman kept pushing forward, leaning into risk management, but it was all becoming less rewarding. More and more, Derman saw the limits of models. Simply put, they couldn't account for uncertainty in a market that was bigger and more complex. He leaned into a broader view, modeling multiple possible futures and understanding risk not as a single number, but a range of possibilities. Then came 9/11, and like many, Derman reassessed everything. Within months, he had ended his 17-year sting at Goldman. It was coming full circle. By 2003, he was back at Columbia, this time as a professor, and after decades in physics and finance, he reached a humbling conclusion. Financial models aren't like physical laws. They don't reveal truths. They're thought experiments, tools for exploring complex realities. He now sees quant finance as a blend of art and science, where intuition, creativity, and communication matter just as much as mathematics. Through this lens, the quant's role is less about conquering uncertainty and more about thoughtfully navigating it.